Duir shifted into his phoenix form and circled above Saruman, spitting a golden-red flame. The fire felt warm rather than scorching, but Saruman looked terrified and scrambled desperately to escape it. This was Duir's strongest inherent life fire, the source of his phoenix nirvana, a life-giving flame that could also burn with devastating force, even to the soul. The golden-red blaze struck Saruman's soul body and flared instantly, turning him into a figure of living fire. As the nirvana fire licked him, Saruman's soul convulsed. A black aura poured from his form as if it were being purged. He screamed in pain. The agony of having one's soul seared was almost unbearable, even for a Maya as mighty as Saruman. Though his soul was resilient and powerful, the Phoenix Nirvana fire alone could not utterly consume him. Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel joined the attack. Gandalf activated the power of the Ring of Air, Narya, channeling its strength into Duir's Nirvana fire. The blaze swelled, becoming far more terrifying. Saruman's soul body was consumed faster as the invigorated Nirvana fire burned with ferocity. The dark power clinging to him was purified at an accelerated pace, and his strength drained away. Galadriel used the power of her ring to trap Saruman's soul, preventing any attempt to flee. Elrond called on his own ring and released a purifying holy light that struck the White Wizard. Under their combined assault, Saruman's once solid soul body grew translucent and insubstantial. His power ebbed. What remained of him shrank into a mere phantom, weaker than a ghost, hovering and ready to dissipate with the slightest wind. The dark power Sauron had given him was completely cleansed. Freed from Sauron's influence, Saruman's gaze cleared. For the first time in long memory, his eyes were calm and peaceful. He looked at the three who had been his allies, and at Duir, who now stood as his executioner, with a rush of conflicting emotions: nostalgia, regret, a quiet yearning. Under the searing nirvana fire, his face became composed, as though he had finally stopped feeling the soul's torment. "You must beware of Sauron," Saruman managed to say. "My failure this time will likely force him down another path, one he would rather avoid. He will find a way to gain even greater power, becoming more dangerous than ever. Middle-earth could be plunged into darkness again. You must prepare." Duir and the others stiffened. "Another way?" Duir asked sharply. "What do you mean? How could Sauron gain power without the One Ring?" Saruman ignored Duir's suspicion that he might be stalling to save himself. He explained, voice steady despite his weakening form. "I infiltrated Hogwarts under Sauron's command. My orders were threefold: obtain the One Ring, seize the Philosopher's Stone to rebuild a body, and secretly corrupt the wizards to make them allies of the dark forces." He looked at Duir with a mixture of envy and resentment. "You have been lucky. I tried to use the Ring of Power to corrupt the students, but Peeves exposed me. My attempt to unleash the Black Death Plague to throw the castle into chaos failed, and you ending up with the Ring of Power ruined my third task entirely." Duir's face darkened at the mention of the plague. "You would try to spread that Black Death? Were you trying to start another great plague?" he snapped, killing intent flaring in his eyes. "Letting your soul fade is too easy. You should burn forever in the fires of hell." Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel regarded Saruman with hard, unforgiving faces. Seeing their coldness, Saruman only gave a bitter smile and offered no defense. "I did these things. I accept whatever punishment is due. But before I go, hear this. Consider it my dying confession. Be vigilant of Sauron. The One Ring is no longer his only route back to power. He prefers the ring above all, but if reclaiming it proves impossible, he will find another way to return. When he does, he will sweep across Middle-earth like thunder. Even if you stand together, you may not be able to stop him." Duir's skepticism was immediate. "Another way? What could it be? The Philosopher's Stone can only make him a body. It can't restore the power held in the One Ring. The One Ring contains his strength. That's why he searches for it so relentlessly. How could there be any other method?" Duir's thoughts skittered back to what he knew of fate and history. In the original trajectory of events, Sauron had always sought the One Ring and never chosen an alternative. Could this divergence be caused by his own appearance, a butterfly effect? He felt uncertain, unsettled by Saruman's claim. Saruman met Duir's doubts with a long, complex look laced with a touch of grim satisfaction. "Sauron's second method is connected to you, Duir." "Connected to me?" Duir frowned. suspicion sharpening his features. Saruman continued, "Do you remember the Black Barbarian Shrine?" Duir was taken aback. "The Black Barbarian Shrine? What does that have to do with Sauron?" It was the place Duir had passed while searching for materials for the Philosopher's Stone. "You haven't forgotten the sacrificial magic array there, have you?" Saruman asked. Duir blinked. He had destroyed that array himself. How could Saruman know? Perceiving his confusion, Saruman did not hold back. "When you went to the Paths of the Dead, I watched you use the Palantir. Although you destroyed the sacrificial magic array afterward, perhaps you forgot. The Palantir can not only see far, it can look back into the past." Duir reacted instantly, his face hard with rage as he glared at Saruman. "You told Sauron about that sacrificial array?" Saruman only nodded, calm. "I knew that ritual circle was meant for Morgoth. All such arrays were destroyed and erased by the Valar when Morgoth fell and was cast into the void, yet for some reason the one in the Black Barbarian Shrine survived. At first I was merely curious about what you destroyed there. I used a Palantir to look back and saw the circle you shattered. Out of curiosity and for study, I memorized its pattern. When you destroyed my body and my spirit fled to Mordor, Sauron seized and enslaved me. That is how the design eventually came into his hands." Elrond, who had known of the circle in the Black Barbarian Shrine and had once asked Duir to destroy the diagram to avoid trouble, frowned. That circle was used by Morgoth's followers to sacrifice human lives to him. How could Sauron use it to regain power? "Because the circle can reach Morgoth," Saruman answered. "Morgoth is banished beyond the world, but the ritual establishes a connection. If enough sacrifices are made, Sauron could re-establish contact with his old master and draw on Morgoth's strength to restore himself." A bitter sneer crossed Saruman's face. "The danger is that once Morgoth is bridged back through the circle, he may use that link to find Arda and return. Sauron was once Morgoth's servant, but he crowned himself lord. He would not willingly become a slave again. That is why he avoided this method. It is perilous and uncertain." He shrugged. "But now, Duir, your arrival has thwarted him again and again. Mordor is hemmed into the Far East and has been forced onto the defensive. With my mission a failure, if Sauron loses hope of reclaiming the One Ring, he may turn to the sacrificial circle to reach Morgoth. Morgoth's dread far surpasses Sauron's. With Morgoth's aid, Sauron would become truly formidable." The room fell heavy. Sauron was terrible, but Morgoth, Galadriel's face tightened at the name. She had lived through the Age of Morgoth and the War of Wrath. She had seen what his power could do. Compared to him, Sauron was nothing more than a Maya. Morgoth had been the mightiest of the Valar. It had taken all their power to defeat and cast him out. During those wars, Middle-earth had been shattered, continents sank, the earth split, whole regions were broken, as if by an apocalypse. Elves had suffered grievous losses. Even Gandalf and Elrond, who had not seen those wars, knew the legends. Orcs, trolls, wargs, dragons, balrogs, all sprung from Morgoth's making. The thought of such a force returning cast a shadow over every heart. Duir stared at Saruman with suspicion. "Why tell us this? Do you want us to spare you?" Saruman ignored the accusation and laughed, a dry, mirthless sound. "Perhaps it is my repentance at the end, or perhaps I simply do not want Sauron to have an easy path." His gaze moved westward, distant and wistful. "Perhaps I chose wrongly from the start. In the end, I have lost the right to return." As he sighed, a strange west wind rose in the sealed room, blowing directly toward Saruman. To Duir's astonishment, the old wizard's spirit dissolved into that blast and vanished. "What was that?" Duir demanded, bewildered. The room had been closed, there should have been no draft, and yet a wind had come through the walls and scattered Saruman's soul. Elrond and Galadriel said nothing, only thoughtful. Gandalf exhaled and shook his head. "Saruman has gone where he belongs. Do not trouble yourself, Duir. He will not appear again." Duir had his own guesses about the west wind, but Gandalf's words were enough. He could not completely scatter Saruman's spirit himself, but as long as the wizard would not return, he felt no disappointment. With Saruman no longer the pressing danger, they turned to Edward. Sent to the school infirmary and tended by Mrs. Amandulf and by Elrond, the most skilled healer present, he soon regained consciousness. Long possession by Saruman had left Edward's spirit shaken, and the ring's corruption had taken its toll. He would need time in bed and careful care. Edward told them how it had happened. Saruman had first taken hold of a second-year student from Isengard. At the opening feast, seeing Duir, he had given off a trace of malice that Duir perceived, and his cover was blown. He had intended to possess Arwen, or even the unborn child, to force Duir to surrender the One Ring and the Philosopher's Stone. Duir's quick judgment had sent Arwen to Rivendell to rest and await her child. The plan failed. So Saruman seized another opportunity and targeted Edward, the vice principal, second only to Duir in school authority, Duir's trusted butler, and someone with access to the castle's private places. Under the guise of seeking instruction on transfiguration, the spirit-possessed student lured Edward into the transfiguration office and ambushed him. Saruman moved in, took Edward for a host, and used his identity and access to pry into Duir's affairs, searching for the ring and the stone. To avoid exposure, Saruman sometimes slipped into other students or professors to cause incidents and divert attention. He had been subtle and patient. No one suspected Edward until Fortune and the Marauder's map revealed the truth. Had the map not betrayed him, Saruman might have succeeded. Fortunately, it was over. The school's lockdown was lifted and life began to recover. Quidditch matches resumed with eager crowds. Apart from those still under observation in the infirmary, students and professors moved freely. Laughter returned to the castle corridors. Duir had fed the dwarven ring to Smaug. A single gout of dragonfire had melted and consumed it. The more dangerous vial, the one that contained a Black Death plague, had been purified and destroyed by Galadriel, Gandalf, and Elrond together, leaving no hidden threat. Time moved on. By March of the following year, Duir had already left the castle, entrusting day-to-day school affairs to Edward, and had gone to Rivendell to accompany Arwen. She had been carrying for 3 years now, and her due date was near. March 21, 2963, the spring equinox. Rivendell, usually a quiet haven of song and shadow, pulsed with a rare, concentrated excitement. All eyes among the elves were drawn to the last homely house where Lord Elrond lived. Inside the house, Duir, Elrond, Celeborn, Eladon, and Elrohir stood in silence, unspeaking sentries before the birthing chamber. Only Lady Galadriel and a few skilled female midwives were within, attending Arwen through her labor. Muffled groans from behind the door made the men's expressions tighten. Elrond and Celeborn kept their outward calm, though one clenched his fists and the other's steady presence seemed to press outward like a held breath. Eladon and Elrohir paced anxiously. Duir stood rigid as a statue, eyes fixed on the closed door as if he could see through wood and curtain. Elrond let out a soft, steadying sigh and, moving closer, tried to comfort him. "Don't be so nervous, Duir. Lady Galadriel is with her, and Arwen is strong. Nothing will go wrong." Duir nodded absently, barely hearing the words. Elrond stopped trying to soothe him. He knew Duir would not relax until Arwen's labor was over. Time stretched thin. Night fell. The star of Arendelle hung bright above, and at last a baby's cry threaded through the quiet of Rivendell. Though not loud, the sound was clear to elven ears, and songs rose like a ripple of blessing through the house. A few minutes later came a second cry. Laughter and tears broke from within the room. Galadriel emerged, smiling, cradling an infant wrapped in white silk. Another maid held a child swaddled in blue. "The one in blue is the elder brother, and the one in white his sister," Galadriel announced, her voice warm. "Arwen has borne you a son and a daughter, Duir." Duir's concern shifted immediately to his wife. "How is Arwen? Is she all right?" he asked, his voice urgent. Galadriel's smile softened. "She is exhausted and has fallen asleep. You may see her if you wish." Duir hurried in. The other men exchanged looks and then relaxed into relieved smiles. Celeborn gave Elrond a pleased nod. "She has found a good husband," he said. Elrond agreed. "Duir is a good man." They did not follow Duir into the chamber to disturb them. Instead, their attention turned to the infants. Celeborn accepted the boy from the midwife. Elrond took the girl from Galadriel. Eladon and Elrohir gathered close, already murmuring in delight over their new nephew and niece. Twins were not unknown in Elrond's house. Elrond and Elros had been twins, and Eladon and Elrohir were twins too, but these were the first twins in Arwen's line. Inside the bedchamber, Duir sat beside Arwen, watching her pale, tired face as if guarding her. Gradually, she stirred and opened her eyes. When she saw him, she reached for him with quiet affection. "Duir," she murmured. Relief flooded him. He took her hand, fretting. "How do you feel? Does it still hurt? Do you want water?" He produced a golden cup and poured a draught they called Ent draught, brewed by the Ents, full of renewing strength, and offered it to her. Under the cup's blessing, the draught worked quickly. Color returned to Arwen's cheeks, and her voice steadied. She watched Duir with soft eyes, and then, with that quick mother's curiosity, asked, "Duir, where are the children? Have you seen them?" Duir's hand froze. For all his worry, he had not truly looked at them. His mind had been on Arwen. He stammered, guilty. They should be with Lord Elrond and the others. Should be. Arwen's gaze sharpened. She looked at him with equal parts reproach and tenderness. "They are our children. As their father, you did not even take the time to look." "No, I did. I looked. They are very beautiful, and they resemble you," Duir protested too quickly. Arwen studied him, unconvinced. "Really? Tell me what you remember. What color is the boy's hair and eyes, and the girl's?" Duir's answer came haltingly. I thought their hair was black, both of them." Arwen only sighed. She knew Duir had not been absent during the pregnancy. He had rested his head on her belly, spoken softly to the children, set aside old prejudices, and tried to nurture them with what he called prenatal education, reciting old spells, recounting histories, and even humming Tom Bombadil's odd little songs. Had he not done that, she might have wondered if he cared at all. Now she let the matter drop and watched him instead with an indulgent smile. At that moment, Elrond and the others re-entered. Elrond leaned close enough to examine his daughter's condition, and satisfied there were no hidden dangers, lifted the infant he held and set her between Arwen and Duir. "Come and see your children," he said. "The girl takes after Arwen. She will be a fair lady." Celeborn placed the boy by his sister. Duir's breath caught. Standing there with the two little lives before him, something in his chest loosened and flooded with love. Wrapped in soft linen, the babies were not wrinkled and red like human infants, but smooth and luminous in the elven way, skin like polished ivory, delicate and unblemished. A fine down of black hair clung to their heads. Their eyes were large and clear, bright with a knowing light, as if they already took in the world. They looked toward their parents with small, contented expressions. They were much alike, as twins often are, almost like gifts wrought with the care of Iluvatar himself, but not identical. The boy's eyes were dark like Duir's, the girl's were a pale gray. Both bore the small, pointed ears of their mother's kind. As half-blood children of a human wizard and a half-elven lady, they had taken more of their mother's lineage and showed the elven form. Duir bent close, unable to tear his gaze away, and the house of Elrond, filled with soft songs and quiet joy, for the two new lives swaddled in blue and white. "Have you decided what to name them, Duir?" Galadriel, Elrond, and the others smiled as they watched the happy family. Dewey and Arwen exchanged a glance, then Dewey turned to Elrond with an earnest look. "Lord Elrond, Arwen and I discussed names for the two children, and we would be honored if you would give them their names." Elrond accepted with obvious pleasure. He regarded his grandchildren with tenderness and, after a moment's thought, announced, "The boy will be named Elses and the girl Elros." Dewey understood the meaning behind the names at once. Both followed the family tradition by beginning with elf. Thur, rendered here in speech as Elsa's alternative form, carries the sense of guardian in Quenya, Elses, guardian of the elves. Roth in Elros is Sindarin for flower, Elros, flower of the elves, a name that evokes beauty and preciousness. Dewey and Arwen liked both names, and so the children were named Elses Duir and Elros Duir, using Dewey's name as the family surname. News of the twins' birth filled Rivendell with joy. Elrond himself held a grand celebratory feast. Elves live long lives and reproduce slowly, and their long gestation and gradual growth mean that even a modest number of elf children can represent decades of accumulation. Although several young elves had been admitted to Hogwarts over the last 2 years, those enrollments were the result of many decades of births. Elves grow slowly. An elven year during the growth phase is roughly 12 human years, and once a new generation has been admitted, it may be many years before another arrives. For Rivendell, then, the arrival of these two half-elven children was a treasured event. Gifts arrived from all corners. small wooden statues carved with exquisite skill, garlands of leaves and flowers, amulets wrought with elven craft, vials of dew gathered under starlight, delicate jewelry, tiny silver and gold necklaces, and jewels of every kind. Elros's presents tended toward feminine, elegant items. Elsa's received more practical toys and weapons, small bows, arrows, and daggers gifted by proud male kin. Elrond gave Elsa's an elven dagger that had once belonged to his twin brother Elros, and presented Celebrion's necklace to his granddaughter Elros. Celeborn and Galadriel, as great-grandparents, contributed as well. A longbow fashioned from Maolong heartwood for Elsa's, and a crown of Maolong blossoms for Elros. By the time the festivities ended, the two small children were playfully burdened with riches. Duir and Arwen stayed in Rivendell for over 2 months. Then, as the Hogwarts term neared its end, they returned to Weathertop to settle and recuperate with the children. They hosted another celebration at the castle to formally announce the birth of their heirs to their wider lands. Many of the guests were professors and students from the school, along with old friends like Bilbo. Everyone looked on with affectionate curiosity at the two small elves. Even the usually reserved youngsters took turns bringing their favorite gifts to the twins. Elros and Elsa's were startlingly quick to develop. At only 3 months old, they were already speaking and taking their first steps. Their mental development outpaced that of human children. Under Duir and Arwen's care, they learned both human and elven tongues, and soon insisted on sitting in on classes to learn about magic. Arwen, despite the recent birth, declined Duir's suggestion that she rest and took up teaching history of magic again. Duir, freed of many other duties as principal, took on the bulk of caring for the children. It became a common sight around the castle. The principal, with a child in each arm, appearing in hallways, courtyards, and classrooms. At meals, Duir sat in the golden chair at the center of the professor's table, Elsa's and Elros in small chairs by his sides. He would feed them continually, neglecting his own plate. The students watched with wide eyes and a good-natured sense of disbelief. Their lord, who had quelled dragons and fought trolls and orcs, had become a doting stay-at-home father. As the children continued to grow, their curiosity and aptitude for learning became apparent. By the year 2967, the first admissions to Hogwarts had reached their 7th year and were preparing to graduate. The school had grown to over 500 students across 7 years, and with so many pupils, the castle buzzed with life. New professorships were added over the years to meet the expanding curriculum. From the 3rd year onward, classes in care of magical creatures, divination, ancient runes, and alchemy were introduced. For care of magical creatures, Duir invited Bjorn, the skin changer, who could assume the form of a great bear and had a natural rapport with animals, an ideal teacher for that subject. Ancient runes was entrusted to the elven prince Legolas, who had developed an interest in runic lore while studying magic and had pursued it with enthusiasm and depth. For divination, on Elrond's recommendation, Duir hired Gilraen, Aragorn's mother. Gilraen had inherited prophetic gifts, though not as famed as her mother Ivorwen, who had been renowned for prophecies concerning the Dunedain. Duir handed Gilraen the divination texts he had acquired from the school's sign-in system so she could prepare. Alchemy remained an advanced course, offered only in the 6th and 7th years and requiring excellent marks in runes for entry. Duir taught alchemy personally, meeting the small class twice a week. With so few students, it did not demand much of his time, and he treated it as a pleasant pastime, an opportunity to foster a few promising alchemists. Life at the castle moved forward in this new rhythm: feasts and laughter, classrooms and apprenticeships, the gentle bustle of a school that had grown from a dream into a living institution. And in the midst of it, Duir and Arwen watched their two small heirs learn and play, certain that the world to which they belonged would be richer for their presence. 7 years after the school's founding, the very first cohort was finally preparing to graduate. Most of the human witches and wizards in that group had matured into young adults. Some had even begun courting one another during their years at school. The slow-growing elves, however, still looked almost the same as the day they enrolled, so small that they could easily stand beside first years without appearing out of place. Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic had established the Ordinary Wizarding Level Exams, OWLs, for 5th years, and the nastily exhausting Wizarding Tests, NEWTs, for 7th years. OWL results decided whether a student could proceed to 6th and 7th year courses. NEWT results largely determined a graduate's career prospects. These exams mattered most to students living in Dewey's territory. Elven students and the Dunedain typically returned to their own communities after graduation, so the pressure on them was much less. For local wizards like Adam Bailey, who lived in Hogsmeade and the surrounding lands, choosing a career was a weighty decision. For wizarding families in the territory, the most desirable job was to remain at Hogwarts. Professorships were respected and well paid. Next in line were positions at the Ministry of Magic, which had become the sole governing body under Duir. Departments like transportation and, most coveted of all, the Auror Office, an elite armed force answerable directly to Duir, drew many applicants. Hundreds of graduating students and many in 5th and 6th year aspired to join the Aurors. Outside the ministry, one particularly popular employer was the Dragon Farm near Isengard. Over years of development, it had come to occupy the whole of the southern Misty Mountains and now housed thousands of wyverns. Hundreds of wizards worked there, yet the operation still felt understaffed. The farm's duties went well beyond breeding. Teams guarded the flocks to prevent escapes and interference, and at intervals, 1 or 2 wyverns were culled for market. Dragon parts were invaluable. Dragon nerve and heartstring went to wand makers like Ollivander. Dragon blood, liver, heart, and other organs sold as prized potion ingredients in Diagon Alley. Because these materials were so rare, prices were astronomical. An ounce of dragon liver cost a galleon, and a pint of dragon blood could fetch well over 100 galleons. Dragon horn, bone, and meat were also sought after. Every time dragon goods reached the market, they were snapped up instantly. The dragon farm no longer relied on subsidies from Dewey or the ministry. Revenue from even a single annual cull, along with steady income from dragon dung, covered expenses and generated surplus. Dragon dung, rich and powerful as fertilizer when composted, was so valuable for growing magical herbs that collecting it became a dedicated line of work with decent pay. Unsurprisingly, farm recruits had to meet high standards. Wyvern handlers were expected to manage dangerous creatures. Of course, other, more mundane careers were available. Clerks in the shops of Diagon Alley, independent shopkeepers, and so on. By the time this first class graduated, most Hogwarts alumni had little trouble finding work. Dewey's territory itself had grown. The wizarding population had risen toward 5,000, magic was more prominent, and settlements now dotted Hogsmeade, Bree, and Isengard. With no statute of secrecy or Muggle protection laws enforced by the current ministry, witches and wizards could often be seen flying openly on broomsticks over the cities. It was the season of the end-of-year banquet, and the mood among the 7th years was heavy with reluctant farewells. In Phoenix House, Adam Bailey stood with a tight chest, saying goodbye to his 2 closest classmates. Aranir, his elven friend, still looked about 11 or 12, childish by elf standards, and would return to Rivendell after graduation to continue his studies until adulthood. Anlamir of the Dunedain had already reached maturity. Though he loved Hogwarts and the wizarding world where he had spent 7 years, he declined Adam's suggestion to work together at the ministry. Duty called him home to the Dunedain lands. Adam himself, buoyed by excellent exam results, had accepted a post in the Auror department, where he would work alongside his father, Mr. Bailey. Other graduates scattered to various ministry departments, took jobs at the Dragon Farm, joined shops in Diagon Alley, or struck out on their own. Inside Hogwarts Castle, Dewey and Arwen's twins were 4 years old. Elses and Elros, beloved by everyone since birth, had grown up without a care, frequently traveling between Hogwarts, Rivendell, and Lothlorien. They inherited their mother's elven blood and the attendant precociousness. They spoke soon after birth, were fluent in both human and elven languages by age 1, could run and leap everywhere, and were a familiar sight in the house common rooms. Their growth rate diverged from human children early on. After 3, they slowed markedly, and by their 4th birthday they looked little different from the year before. For a long time to come, they would remain small while their human peers matured. Because they were so capable, Dewey had trusted them with wands before the standard school age, after securing their promise not to misuse them. He personally crafted both wands. Elsa's shaft came from a section of Maolong tree in the garden, Elros's from a branch of the white tree, and both cores were phoenix feathers taken from Dewey himself. With those identical cores, the twins could cast together to produce effects greater than the sum of their parts, and, in times of danger, the phoenix feather cores allowed their father to locate and come to them immediately. Over the past few years, Dewey had spent long months in the castle building the Room of Requirement. It was, in effect, a wishing room. It changed its form to meet the needs of whoever summoned it. It could not conjure food or life from nothing, but it could manifest nearly anything that existed in the world. Ask for a chamber piled high with gold, and the room would produce mountains of coins, coins that existed only inside its walls and vanished the moment they were taken outside. Dewey made the room appear at random places in the castle instead of fixing it to one floor or corridor, and he linked it to every part of the fortress: the kitchens, the dormitories, the basilisk chamber, the dragon treasury. To keep students from stumbling into dangerous places, he restricted its permissions. Only a specific incantation combined with focused imagination would bring its door to the wall and reveal the desired interior. Dewey used the room as his private research lab and as a hiding place for his most precious Horcruxes: the Palantir, the Philosopher's Stone, the Crown of Wisdom, and a golden cup. Apart from Arwen, no one else knew the secret of the room's existence. It was, in every sense, a secret chamber. After Saruman's final disappearance and the destruction of Thror's ring by dragonfire, Mordor had seemed to fall silent. Still, Saruman's dying warning left Dewey, Gandalf, Elrond, and the others on constant alert. They feared Sauron might use some sacrificial rite to open a channel to Morgoth, but they could not march into Mordor and stop him outright. All they could do was prepare in secret, gather soldiers, station commanders, shore up defenses, and wait for whatever came. Beneath Mount Doom, under the watch of ringwraiths and dark sorcerers, orcs and their masters raised an enormous altar on a barren plain. They quarried black stones cooled from lava and set them into a vast platform. Around its giant statues with savage features, the stone faces were carved to inspire terror and a dark, hungry awe. Deep grooves scored the altar's surface. Seen from above, those channels formed the pattern of a vast magic array. A river of lava flowed from Mount Doom toward the plains, a crimson artery of heat and sulfur that turned the air into a living furnace. Upstream from the altar, a pipe of iron had been driven to divert a portion of that molten flood. Two strong orcs smashed open a sluice, and red-hot lava poured into the altar's channels, winding through the carved ravines until every groove brimmed with fire. Mount Doom's lava came from the Earth's heart, a substance of such energy it could melt even the One Ring. When the molten rock filled the channels, the altar thrummed as if awakened. The statues drank in the mountain's power like black mouths, and Mount Doom answered by belching even more lava and ash. The sky over Mordor, already a permanent bruise of clouds, darkened further. Ash and rolling night clouds hid the daylight and twisted noon into something like midnight. On the altar, the Witch King of Angmar, leader of the Ringwraith, stood with a voice that cut like iron. He intoned the ritual words in the dark speech: "Bring them forth." The sea of orcs opened as if of its own accord, and prisoners, hundreds of humans, and a few elves, were driven forward in a ragged, chained procession. They had been taken from Gondor, Rohan, Lothlorien, and Mirkwood. The imprisonment and brutality of Mordor had stripped them of much of their former selves. Some pleaded until their voices broke, some stared with blank shock, others met their fate with a hatred that only deepened as they knelt upon the stone slabs. An ugly orc with a butcher's blade severed a head. Blood spouted and ran into the lava. Orcs below howled and brandished their weapons in frenzied delight. Heads were flung into the molten channels, bodies were shoved after them and swallowed in hissing flame. The Witch King chanted on, a cold liturgy of malice, and one by one the captives were slaughtered like lambs. Their blood slicked the altar. Their lives fed the magic. With every life taken, the array fed on a darker power. The lava in the channels burned hotter and redder, the air itself growing heavy with violent energy. Black clouds swelled and lightning spidered within them. Black ravens and vast bats beat the sky and circled over the altar like vultures. After countless bodies had been consumed, the Witch King hissed, "Not enough. More." When no more prisoners remained, the orcs produced other victims. Mordor contained human peoples who had sworn fealty to Sauron or were enslaved to his service. The Easterlings, the Haradrim, local human bondsmen. At a command, thousands were driven forward and butchered. The sacrificial array answered with a terrible surge. Smoke and flame compacted into something that seemed to gather consciousness, a dark pressure like the breath of something vast and hungry. Even the raucous orcs grew uneasy, their courage buckling as if something in the air had reached in and pried at their bones. The Witch King's appetite only sharpened. "We cannot stop," he snarled. "We must continue." "We have run out of slaves," the orc chieftain protested. "We will have to capture more." The Witch King's face was a blade of shadow. He swept his gaze across the tens of thousands of orcs assembled and let a cold laugh fall from him. "There are so many here," he said. "Send up the weaker ones. Their blood will do." Panic rippled through the ranks. The chieftain, an Uruk-hai himself and partial to his breed, hesitated. The ringwraiths closed like a noose. Sorcerers and riders pressed in, their intent clear. Dissent would be answered by death. The leader's throat tightened. Self-preservation won out. He gave the order at once. Uruk-hai, bred by Saruman and tougher than ordinary orcs, fell upon the weakest of the orcs. Screams filled the air as the favored warriors cut them down and dragged their broken bodies to the stones. Thousands more lives were poured into the altar's channels. Orcs, not only humans and elves. And with those sacrifices, the altar convulsed. Black smoke rolled in, choking waves. Flames shifted and coalesced into a palpable, devouring aura. The sky over Mordor seemed to deepen into a night so absolute it swallowed the last sliver of dawn. From the heart of the smoke, two eyes kindled, burning like coals. They pierced the darkness with a gaze that pressed down on the land and the living beneath it, carrying with it a suffocating weight, a presence answering the call of thousands of spilled lives. Massive, fiery eyes opened above the altar, their light thrown across countless times and spaces. Though only a projection of a gaze, it drove the surrounding ringwraiths, dark sorcerers, orcs, and others to abject terror. None could bear it. All fell prostrate, trembling beneath the black smoke and flame that cloaked that stare. The projection ignored these insects and fixed instead on the fiery eye above Barad-dûr. "Sauron, my servant, why have you summoned me from the void?" Morgoth's gaze, cold, ancient, and implacable, pierced the eye and locked onto the spirit of Sauron hidden within Barad-dûr. At the sight of his former master, Sauron, the Dark Lord, dropped every mask of composure and bowed with overwhelming reverence. "Great Dark Lord Morgoth, since you were cast into the void, I have upheld your will. I have sought to bring all of Arda under your dominion, but the elves and men, aided by the emissaries of the Valar from the west, resisted me. I was grievously wounded, stripped of form and power. I could not complete your purpose. So I sacrificed and prayed for your descent, to regain strength by your help. Once I conquer all of Arda, I will see you freed and restore you to this land." Morgoth sneered, amusement curling in the void around his words. "My most trusted servant, always so cunning and eloquent. I see your ambition plainly, you who wish to rule the world. Perhaps you are less eager for my return than those hypocrites in the West. Have you summoned my will because you are at the end of your rope and must use my power to rebuild your strength?" With his intent exposed, Sauron's deferential guise fell away. What remained was naked ambition and cold majesty. "Morgoth, then make a bargain with me. Lend me your power so I may rule this world. In return, I will help free you and bring you back from the void." "Is that your true face?" Morgoth's voice was sharp with approval. "Excellent. No wonder you became the second Dark Lord after my fall. You surprise me, Sauron." Morgoth did not rage at Sauron's insolence. Rather, he found himself increasingly impressed. From the void he had been cast after the War of Wrath, but the sacrificial array had conveyed to him a torrent of information, events from that war to the present, and he could judge Sauron's deeds for himself. Though Sauron had betrayed him, even usurped influence in his absence, the depth of his cunning astonished the Vala. A Maya by nature, Sauron had engineered the sinking of Numenor and come close to ruling Middle-earth. Such accomplishments drew Morgoth's grudging admiration. "Very well," Morgoth said. "I accept your bargain." Sauron exulted inwardly. He knew Morgoth's power. With the Vala's aid, he could restore his form and reclaim his peak. But Morgoth's acceptance came with a condition. "I am cast in the void beyond Arda," Morgoth warned. "My power cannot reach back here unless there is sustenance to bridge the breach. To channel more of my power into Arda, to restore you, I will need sacrifices, not the lesser spawn I made, but the children of Ilúvatar. Only their blood and souls can nourish me enough to break Arda's barrier and let my strength descend." Sauron had imagined only military orc corpses as payment. "How many?" he asked, calculating quickly. "A few thousand could be seized. Tens of thousands might be gathered by war." He had almost 1,000,000 orcs, expendable as cannon fodder. Morgoth's demand exceeded his expectations. 1,000,000 children of Ilúvatar, the Vala declared. At least 1,000,000. Even Sauron paused. The combined peoples of Gondor and Rohan probably did not number 1,000,000. They would not suffice even if annihilated and seized in whole. To gather 1,000,000 would mean war across the lands. Easterlings, Southrons, the peoples of the south and east, dragged into an atrocity on a scale comparable to the Great Plague of old. Yet the prize was irresistible. With Morgoth's help, Sauron could remake himself, sweep away resisting forces, and retrieve the One Ring. With such power, he might become the supreme force in Middle-earth. There was, of course, the peril in Morgoth's bargain. Every sacrifice that bound Morgoth to Arda would feed the Vala as well. The day could come when Morgoth, bolstered by the sacrifices, broke his bonds and returned. Then Sauron would stand before a being of vastly greater power, one he could not hope to master. Sauron, proud and tasting dominion, would not willingly accept servitude. Yet as a Maya he could never match a Vala. Still, practical ambition prevailed. If he could restore himself to full might first, seize dominion, and then find a way to forestall or confront Morgoth, he would take that risk. There was more driving them than mere hunger for rule. Morgoth hungered for the authority that might rival Ilúvatar's itself, an authority that, in his imagination, would make him supreme in Arda. Sauron, a Maya and a disciple of such designs for long, had glimpsed hints of that secret while serving his master, and had been shaped by it. His own endless striving for power, his long manipulations, and the grand deception of Annatar had their source in that influence. Disguised as Annatar, Lord of Gifts, Sauron had befriended the Elves and taught them craft, forging the rings of power so that through the One Ring he might control the rulers of elves, men, and dwarves, and thereby seize the world. It was all part of the same hunger, a web of schemes, sacrifice, and bargaining that now reached its apogee beneath the black gaze of Morgoth. Sauron had not expected the Elves to grow suspicious. The Eldar had secretly forged 3 rings of power for themselves, and then hidden them away, refusing to use them so long as the One Ring endured. The rings made for the dwarves proved almost useless. Their hardy nature blunted the ring's sway, and so 7 of those rings were squandered. Only the 9 found their mark. 9 human kings were twisted and bound into the Nazgul. Morgoth and Sauron, each nursing his own designs, came to terms. Sauron sought Morgoth's aid to restore substance and strength to his spirit. Morgoth, in turn, hoped to use Sauron's sacrifice to renew his own power and loosen ancient bonds. To grant Sauron a taste of triumph, Morgoth poured a shard of his primeval darkness through the altar and into the eye that sat upon Barad-dûr. The eye swelled, grew hotter, and flared with a new, terrible radiance. Its presence pressed down with an urgency Sauron had longed for. For him, the gift was like rain after a long drought. Though slight, it kindled hope. When Morgoth's will had poured itself out, the altar could no longer sustain him. His essence faded. Only the barren altar remained. Its lava had cooled to a dull glow, giving off a bitter sulfur stench. Any bones that had lain there, human, elven, or orc, had long since been consumed. "Deliver my command." Sauron's voice thundered from Barad-dûr. "From this day, the armies of Mordor will go forth in numbers, capture humans and bring them to Mordor. The more, the better." "Yes," the armies roared. "Master," the Witch King of Angmar asked with cold courtesy, "do you mean to strike at Gondor or Rohan?" "Not yet," Sauron answered. An all-out attack now would alert the elves and the wizards and upset my plans. The priority is not conquest, but captives. We will gather humans, live, bring them here." The Witch King hesitated. "But, Master, 1,000,000 sacrifices will be hard to come by. Gondor and Rohan have the largest populations. They would yield most easily." "There is no need to hurry," Sauron said. "Decades are but a breath. Men are like grass. Cut them down and they regrow. In a few generations, numbers will swell again. For now, take from the east, send our hosts into Rovanion and the Sea of Rhûn, into the lands of the Easterlings, Khand and Harad. Bring back all who resist. Those lands are within our influence. Keep them in pens, let them breed. Meanwhile, the orcs must multiply, forge more blades and armor. When the hour comes, we will strike at Rohan and Gondor together. There is no need to occupy their realms. Simply fill Mordor with living sacrifices." Following that command, vast hosts poured from Mordor and spread eastward. Armies marched into the easterling lands north of Mordor, into Khand to the east, and south toward Harad. In those regions, Easterlings, Variegs, Haradrim, many had already accepted Sauron's sway and fought alongside his forces. But here and there, spurred by the two blue wizards, pockets of resistance persisted. Now those rebellions were crushed. Each Mordor host was led by a ringwraith. Worse than slaughter was the new cruelty. The armies did not merely kill, they sought prisoners. Men were bound and driven without rest toward the dark camps of Mordor, lashed and goaded until they reached the pens. Tribes that had once bowed to Mordor were not spared. They were obliged to hand over a quota of people to be taken away as offerings. Squadrons of orcs, guided by crows and great bats, pushed far into the wilderland north of Mordor, wiping out small settlements and hauling every survivor back to Barad-dûr. Far to the east and north, the alarm spread. Even Dorwinion, along the northwest edge of the Sea of Rhûn, was raided, vineyards burned, hamlets sacked. Though resistance was raised, many men and elves were seized by the Mordor hosts. The blue wizards did their best. Moretta and Rumastamo organized levies and met the Nazgûl in the field. They managed in places to throw back the ringwraiths, but at great cost. By the time organized resistance could rally coherently, nearly half the people of the Sea of Rhûn region had been carried off. In Rovanion and the Wilderland, the scattered villages were all but emptied and laid waste. Rohan and Gondor felt the tremors of these raids. Mordor had not launched a full-scale western invasion, yet bands of orcs slipped across borders, snatching folk from frontier farms and settlements. Alarmed, the kings mobilized the armies and pushed patrols to the marches. Through the Seeing Stones, the rulers of Rohan and Gondor sought counsel and aid from Duir, Gandalf, and Elrond. Months passed. There was no great push westward from Mordor, only harassment, small raiding parties that were frequently slain or driven off by the forces of men. Still, both realms remained on tenterhooks. In Rivendell, the news brought the White Council to its gardens for another grim council. Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, Rumastamo, and Duir gathered. Since Saruman's treachery, he had been stripped of leadership. The other members had raised Gandalf to the head of the council. At Gandalf's invitation, the two blue wizards of the Far East were taken into the council's fellowship. Círdan was at sea, sending elves westward, and so could not attend. Morda, too, was needed in the east and could not come. Rumastamo spoke instead for both of them and carried their plea for aid. None among the council wished to stand idle. Elrond and Galadriel pledged forces from Rivendell and Lothlorien. 1,000 elven warriors would be sent east to bolster Moretta. Duir, representing his own power, dispatched 100 Auror wizards to join the expedition. The West, quietly and swiftly, was gathering to answer Mordor's new, grim design. Though there were only 100 Aurors, none dared to underestimate them. Even Gandalf, Elrond, and the others agreed. The 100 Aurors were worth more than the 1,000 elves sent from Rivendell and Lothlorien. At Duir's instruction, the Ministry of Magic had not only dispatched the Aurors, but also provided port keys and extended the Floo network and fireplaces across the Far East, so the combined Elven and Auror forces could be moved to the Rhûn region in a matter of hours. On the battlefield, 1,000 elves and the Far Eastern rebels held the front lines against tens of thousands of Mordor soldiers, while the 100 Aurors struck like a razor into the heart of Mordor. Trained and coordinated, they wielded their wands with lethal precision, cutting down ranks of orcs and easterlings. Melee attacks from orcs and easterlings barely threatened them. Only dense volleys of Morgul-tipped arrows engraved with dark curses could truly harm an Auror. Even then, the Aurors worked in pairs, one attacking while the other defended, casting rapid counterspells to blunt the cursed shots. They were protected in every way possible. Many wore defensive items made from dragon scales and carried enchanted brooches, rings, necklaces, and alchemical trinkets. Their robes, woven from giant spider silk by Madame Rose's robe shop with magical techniques, offered potent protective enchantments. The Aurors were armed to the teeth. For Duir and the Ministry, the loss of even one Auror would have been a grave cost. Another reason for sending them was practical. These Aurors had little real combat experience. Apart from the siege at the Troll Forest, they had never seen a true war. This campaign, facing tens of thousands of Mordor troops, was a rare chance to learn. Using apparition and broomsticks, the Aurors flashed across the battlefield, striking from unexpected angles. Those skilled in direct curses hurled violent explosions and shattering spells. Transfiguration specialists turned swords and spears into venomous snakes or feral beasts that turned on their owners. Mischief-making jinxes proved devastating. Mordor soldiers were made to laugh uncontrollably, or their legs locked together so they had to hop in place, or their teeth and nails sprouted grotesquely and rendered them useless. Potions were dispersed as thick gray mists and then driven into enemy lines with summoned winds, leaving combatants unconscious. Herbologists scattered devil's snare seeds grown by Professor Margales and instantly accelerated their growth by magic. Vines erupted and strangled soldiers where they stood. Spells streaked through the air. Colors flashed, flames leapt skyward, and explosions burst in a relentless cascade. Under the onslaught of 100 Aurors, the Mordor host lurched into chaos, and with the elves and rebels pressing the front, the balance of the field tipped toward the forces of justice. Mordor still had its weapons, however. Beyond orcs, trolls, and easterlings, there were wargs, vampires, and dark sorcerers, creatures and sorcerers of far greater threat. Wargs were not ordinary wolves, but evil-possessed hounds, more like werewolves, far stronger than normal wargs. Their claws and fangs carried poison and were augmented by malignant power. Vampires, Sauron's servants, resembled enormous bats with bony wings tipped with talons. They fed on blood and were almost impossible to kill, except by sunlight. Dark sorcerers were the most insidious, humans corrupted by Sauron's teachings, masters of fell witchcraft. Before he became a ringwraith, the Witch King of Angmar had been just such a sorcerer, powerful enough to earn his title. If orcs, trolls, and easterlings were cannon fodder to Sauron, wargs, vampires, and dark sorcerers were his confidants, kept near the stronghold. The wargs moved like hulking half-man, half-wolf predators, eyes glowing red with malice. They charged across the field on all fours with blinding speed, ripping at Aurors with poisoned fangs. Ordinary spells barely slowed them, and even lethal curses merely tore wounds that knit shut before the spellcaster's eyes. Vampires hunted from the sky, outpacing broom riders and appearing beside victims without warning to tear throats out with hooked claws. Their screeches could charm and hypnotize, bending minds and wills. Dark sorcerers were fewer in number, but the core danger. They stayed behind the front and chanted foul incantations that summoned evil spirits to possess the dead and form an undead legion. The Aurors did not falter. They formed impenetrable defensive spells and unleashed Patronuses in a dazzling array. Cats, dogs, lions, swans, dolphins, and more burst from the ends of wands in strands of shimmering light. The holy radiance of the Patronuses was a perfect counter to the darkness. Wargs, vampires, and possessing spirits recoiled. Patronuses swarmed possessed corpses and wargs alike, clinging to hides and tearing at the malignant presences inside. One antelope Patronus darted forward, ramming itself into a besieged spirit with fierce determination. The Patronus had no physical form and could not wound the warg's body, but it struck directly at the malignant spirit that animated it. Bereft of a host, the evil presence was pummeled by the Patronus until it grew faint. The warg, freed from the spirit's influence, seemed to revert to its original, natural state, suddenly weak and helpless. The Aurors seized the chance, finishing the creature with precise spells. When a drained, possessed host died, the spirit that had dwelt within it became rootless. It shrieked once, a high, piercing wail, then dissolved into nothing. The undead legion fared worse. The spirits that animated the reanimated corpses were far weaker than those inside the wargs. The Patronuses tore through their ranks, incorporeal light driving the spirits out and wrenching them free of the bodies. Once unpossessed, the corpses fell still and cold, nothing more than motionless husks. The Aurors did not linger over these fallen. Their priority was to sever Mordor's head. They aimed their strike directly at the dark sorcerers who commanded the evil spirits. Following the Auror captain's orders, 100 Aurors apparated into positions around the sorcerers and struck as one. Bones of the enemy. Thunderbolt explosion, Defindo, incantations hammered the center of the enemy formation. The dark sorcerers were not to be underestimated. Stronger than wargs or vampires, they chanted back, conjuring a dense black mist filled with contorted faces. Humans, elves, orcs, dwarves, each mouth yawning like a black hole. The mouths swallowed Auror spells as if ravenous, then condensed into streaks of sulphurous smoke that lunged at the Aurors with malicious delight. A few Aurors reacted too slowly. The smoke struck their protection and shattered some of their wards. Their physical armor and enchantments absorbed the blow, so no lives were lost, but the close call hardened their resolve. They stopped holding back and pressed their assault. The captain drew a heavy box from his spatial pouch and tossed it skyward. When it burst, Thunderbird Zorando manifested in a crackle of lightning and thunder, a living storm. The clouds overhead churning, the Thunderbird dove into them, and the heavens answered with a single, terrible bolt. Lightning struck straight down among the dark sorcerers. The blast incinerated the sorcerers and scorched the surrounding terrain for hundreds of meters. The downpour of lightning did not stop there. Vampires, wheeling in the sky, became targets for strikes that turned them to ash in an instant. Even their prodigious regeneration could not save them. The Aurors cheered as the Thunderbird's power laid waste to the enemy command. With the backbone of Mordor's forces, wargs, vampires, dark sorcerers, shattered, the armies of Mordor screamed into disarray. Under relentless pursuit by the Aurors, the Elves, and the uprising army, the Mordor host collapsed and fled. The Aurors acted as a special forces arm, apparating across battlefields to carry out decapitation strikes and to rescue captured humans before they could be hauled back to the Mordor lair. From the Great Wilderness and the Rhûn region to the north, through Khand in the west, and even into Harad to the south, Aurors appeared again and again. With the constant aid of Thunderbird Zorando and the two blue wizards, Romestamo and Moretta, they turned back tide after tide, but not without cost. They faced near-death encounters, clashed with powerful ringwraiths, and burned through every defensive charm and alchemical device they carried. Had they not had a handful of last-life portkeys, the 100 Aurors might have been wiped out. After 6 months of relentless campaigning, the Aurors had become grizzled veterans. Their skill and coordination had improved in ways that could not be measured by tallying spells alone. Under the combined pressure of wizards, elves, and the uprising armies led by the blue wizards, Mordor's forces were driven back into their lair. Tens of thousands of humans were retrieved, free peoples who had refused Sauron's rule. Gathered now near the Sea of Rhûn, these rescued folk formed a substantial force capable of resisting another invasion from the Far East. When the expedition concluded, the Aurors and Elven warriors bid the blue wizards farewell and returned to their homes by fireplaces and portkeys. The success of the campaign sent a ripple through Middle-earth. That 100 Aurors from a single school could wield such destructive power, especially against armies of orcs, trolls, and Easterlings, drew eyes and opened doors. Rohan, Gondor, and other realms moved quickly to establish relations with Hogwarts. Gondor and Rohan extended invitations to the Ministry of Magic to bring the Floo network into their territories so they might summon help swiftly should Mordor rise again. Yet Mordor itself went strangely quiet. The long harassment of Gondor and Rohan's borders halted. Mass raids to seize more humans ceased, as if the land had been cowed. After months of wary watchfulness, Gondor and Rohan allowed themselves a measure of relief, but the White Council remained sober and alert. The expedition had rescued tens of thousands, yes, but many more had been taken and dragged back to Mordor. Conservative estimates place the total abducted at around 100,000 souls from Rovanian, Rhûn, Khand, and Herod. That tally chilled the council. Could Sauron be gathering those lives as offerings for Morgoth through some sacrificial array? Morgoth's name alone brought fear. Though banished to the void, his power remained a nightmare possibility if he and Sauron were to conspire. The Blue Wizard Morda proposed forming an allied army of elves, men, and wizards, led by the White Council, to strike Mordor and free the captives before any ritual could be completed. In private councils, many were eager. In public, they tried to marshal courage. In the end, they had to refuse themselves. Mordor was Sauron's root, a land saturated with his evil and bound intimately to Mount Doom, the font of his power. Galadriel warned that Mordor was a demonic lair from which none returned. Any who entered would find their strength sapped and their life force leached away. Even the White Council would weaken there. Together, they still might not withstand Sauron's might at his home ground. To force an attack now would likely mean marching to oblivion. Reluctantly, the council decided to hold back and watch, hoping for a weakness to appear. And in the heart of Mordor, behind ramparts and black towers, the preparations continued. On a massive altar in the inner highlands, blood ran like a river, painting the place into a scene of living hell. Black smoke and black fire surged over the altar as thousands of humans were brutally sacrificed. The dark power they formed lashed and roared, a furious, devouring force that reached for everything. The orcs tasked with driving the victims forward stood back in terror, unwilling to set a single foot closer. They did not need to. From the heart of the altar's black mist and flame, tens of thousands of energy tendrils shot forth. With 1,000 terrified screams, the tendrils coiled around every human and dragged them screaming into the abyss, consuming them utterly, body and soul, until nothing remained. With hundreds of thousands of lives and souls offered up, the sacrificial power pierced the barrier of the world and plunged into the void beyond Arda. That place was a chaotic nothingness. No up or down, no left or right, no light or dark. Even time itself did not exist. In that void floated a figure the size of a mountain, chained and motionless, Morgoth, the Dark Lord, once foremost among the Valar. After his defeat in the War of Wrath, he had been bound by Anginor, the iron chain forged by Ale the Smith, and cast out beyond the world. Still, he had never ceased struggling to break his bonds and return to Arda. An old prophecy spoke of such a day, when Morgoth would break free, return, and bring ruin, when he would shroud the sun and moon and lead legions of demons and monsters against the combined hosts of the Ainur, elves, men, and dwarves. The prophecy said that though Morgoth would finally be slain and Arda destroyed, Ilúvatar would lead a second music of the Ainur to make a new world. For 2 ages, Morgoth's body had been unmade, only his immortal spirit lingered, weak and diminished. Now, however, an invisible flood of sacrificial power had pierced the world barrier and poured into the void. It fell upon the Dark Lord like rain upon parched earth. His spirit, starved for life, drank it in. A slow, contented groan echoed through the void. Morgoth's aura swelled, the darkness about him tearing at the very fabric of the nothing that held him. A terrible storm began to churn in the silent emptiness. His shape inflated until he rose taller than a mountain, seeking to wrench himself free of his chains. But the iron of Anginor held. The chains were beyond ordinary metal, wrought with law and light and the power of the Valar, and they tightened as Morgoth strained, suppressing him further, as if to choke him out. The violent surge within him subsided. He deflated again, smaller than a mountain, the unleashed power ebbing back into calm. "No need to hurry," he murmured then, voice full of cold certainty. "I have time. I have patience." Back in Mordor, where the sacrifice had been made, a black aperture had opened on the altar, a hole into the unknown void. It hungrily tugged at the world, its gravity sinister and absolute. To gaze at it made the soul tremble, as if a second would bring being snatched away. Light itself seemed to be swallowed. Life that neared was drawn in and erased without trace. Only one being could stand before that portal, Sauron in spirit form. The black hole shuddered and vomited a pure, primeval dark power that fell upon Sauron. The infusion of that primordial force made his spirit explode with renewed might. His incorporeal form gained solidity and presence. His oppressive will became palpable. The great eye above Barad-dûr burned hotter, a bleeding flare of dark fire that saw farther and with crystalline clarity. Mount Doom, bound to Sauron by deep ties, roiled violently. Black smoke climbed and spread into a vast canopy over all Mordor, a spreading umbra that pushed outward beyond the plain. Rivers of lava poured and rolled like molten waterfalls. Eruptions churned the land. The spectacle was so monstrous that even the capital of Gondor, many leagues away, could see the inferno's glow. The regent of Gondor, sensing danger, turned a palantir toward Mordor to see what had stirred. Before he could take in the scene, the eye of Barad-dûr found him through the seeing stone. A burning, watchful image filled the palantir. A corrosive mental force reached out and tried to seize him. The regent fought to tear his will free, pale and shaking when he finally broke the connection. He hurriedly wrapped the palantir in a black cloth and did not dare use it again. Far off, Galadriel of Lothlorien, Elrond of Rivendell, and Gandalf of Hogwarts each turned their gaze toward the east, faces grave as they felt the shadow spread. Time surged forward to September 22nd, 3001 of the Third Age. In Hobbiton, on the party field, Bilbo Baggins celebrated his 111th birthday. He had refused Dewey's suggestion that the feast be held at Hogwarts Castle and insisted that the celebration be in his own green land, among his own people. He invited friends and neighbors from all around Hobbiton. The whole Shire turned up to share in the revelry. Everyone in the Shire knew the Baggins of Bag End was rich, so everyone came with curiosity and good cheer. Bilbo was also a figure of particular fascination. Handsome, ageless, and notoriously wealthy. Rumors ran wild that he had received favors from the Lord of Hogwarts and even been charmed with long life. Bilbo said nothing of such gossip. Most days he contented himself at Bag End, writing down the memoirs of his adventures. People were too polite, or too wary, to press him. After all, Bilbo and the Lord of Hogwarts were known friends, and wizards were no rare sight among trade routes and at fairs. Hogwarts' influence had grown over the decades. Its territory had crept westward until the Brandywine Bridge and the Old Forest formed the boundary with the Shire. Bree, Hogsmeade, and other markets bought pipeweed, mushrooms, beer, and wine from the Shire, and the occasional wizard could be seen traveling along the roads. So hobbits were not strangers to wizards, even if they preferred their own fireside. This year's party drew a notable crowd. Not only were there the usual neighbors and old friends, but the mayor, the councillors, and the sheriff of the Shire came to pay respects. Distant relations, too. Members of the Tooks and the Brandybucks were there, filling the party field with laughter, songs, and the smell of good food. Huge tents were set up in the gathering field. Elders sat on long benches, drinking beer and chatting about trivial matters. The younger hobbits were dancing country reels to cheerful, relaxed music, while children wove through the crowd, playing and laughing. Compared with the lively field, Bag End felt unusually quiet. Bilbo wore a pale yellow jacket. He looked the same as he had decades ago, healthy and spry, only his expression had been softened by time, carrying a calm, peaceful air. He sat on the sofa, turning a page in the adventure journal that recorded the exploits of the Lonely Mountain Expedition team, and smiled at old memories. A knock came at the door. A young hobbit entered. Delicate features, bright eyes, a thick head of brown curls. "Uncle Bilbo, the party's started and everyone's waiting for you," Frodo said with a smile. Bilbo looked up fondly, placing a golden Malorn leaf bookmark between the pages before closing the book. "I celebrate my birthday every year," he said, shaking his head. "I won't be harmed by being a little late." Still, his gaze held a light of anticipation as it drifted toward the fireplace. "Besides, my guests haven't all arrived yet. We'll go once I've received them." "Guests? More guests today?" Frodo asked, surprised. "Of course," Bilbo said with a half-laugh. "If there were no guests, why would I bother throwing a party? Do you think I enjoy chatting with the Shire folk who are always trying to pry into my affairs?" Frodo didn't respond to Bilbo's jab about neighbors. He only asked, curious, "Who are you waiting for, Uncle? Why do you look so solemn?" Before Bilbo could answer, the fire in the hearth flared green. Bilbo's eyes lit up. He rose with delight. "Our guests are here." From the green flame stepped a delicate, beautiful child who seemed 11 or 12. Long black hair cascaded down his back, held by a slender silver band. His skin was snow-white, his features almost androgynous, with just a hint of heroic resolve in his brow. In the dim evening light, his figure seemed to give off a faint glow. He straightened, bowed politely, and greeted Bilbo. "Uncle Bilbo, happy birthday!" "Elses!" Bilbo cried, surprised and delighted. He gave the boy a big hug, feeling affection for the child who was nearly as tall as he was. "I'm so glad you could come. Where are your father and the others? Are they behind you?" Elses liked this hobbit uncle very much and nodded. "Dad and Elros are right behind me. Uncle Bilbo, this is my birthday present for you. I hope you like it." He handed over a small gift box. Bilbo's surprise deepened. "Oh, dear Elses, I'll love whatever you give me." Inside the box lay a tiny vial of golden liquid. Bilbo stared in astonishment. "Is this?" "It's the Felix Felicis I brewed," Elses said. "It grants 24 hours of good luck." Bilbo held the vial as if it were priceless. He remembered the one Duir had once given him when Frodo had wandered off. The miraculous day he had found Frodo and experienced a streak of impossible luck. He hesitated to accept such a precious gift. "Take it, Bilbo," Dewey's voice came from the fireplace. He appeared amid the green flame, smiling, holding his younger daughter Elros by the hand. "This is Elsa's sincere present. He started brewing it over 6 months ago to give you for your 111th birthday." "Dewey Elros," Bilbo called, joyous. Elros ran forward, tugging free of Dewey's hand and producing a larger gift box from her pocket. She and Elsa's were nearly identical, the only obvious difference being her gray eyes and much longer hair. She wore an elven circlet given to her by their great-grandmother. Compared with composed Elsa's, Elros was lively and outgoing, a cheerful sprite adored by everyone. Though 38 years old, the twins still looked 11 or 12. In fact, they had only graduated from Hogwarts the previous year. Bilbo opened Elros's box to find a set of chess unlike any ordinary set. The pieces were split into black and white armies. The white side held human kings, elves, and dwarves. The black side was made up of orcs on wargs, trolls, and ringwraiths. When placed on the board, the figures came to life, moving, speaking, thinking, like a tiny living battlefield. The snarling orcs and roaring trolls jolted Bilbo, reminding him of the expedition and run-ins with orcs and trolls long ago. "Uncle Bilbo, this is wizard chess," Elros explained with a bright smile. "You can command one side and play alone, or 2 people can play together. If you play by yourself, I recommend you choose the black side." "Why the black side?" Bilbo asked, amused. Elros winked. "Because if you command the ugly black pieces badly, you get to watch those orcs, trolls, and ringwraiths smashed to pieces by the white side. It's very satisfying. Even if you lose, you won't be disappointed." Bilbo laughed and wiped at his eyes. "Thank you, dear Elros. I love your gift." When it was Dewey's turn, he simply took out a small potion and smiled. "No surprises from me. It's the same as before. Happy 111th birthday, my friend." Bilbo looked at the elixir Dew offered and sighed with gratitude. "This is what countless folk dream of," he said softly, "far more precious than any surprise." Frodo stared in wonder at the elegant elf Elses who had arrived first, and then at Duir and Elros, who had come a moment later. He had heard tales of Duir from Uncle Bilbo and had always been impressed, but he had never seen him in person until now. Seeing Duir's young, handsome face and his graceful, mysterious, yet commanding bearing, Frodo instantly recognized the wizard lord who, in Bilbo's stories, had once subdued a giant dragon. The 2 elven siblings beside him shared an aristocratic, timeless air and bore features not unlike Duir's. Sensing Frodo's gaze, Duir, who had been speaking with Bilbo, turned and met his eyes. A gentle smile softened his face. "You're Frodo, aren't you? I held you when you were small. It's hard to believe you've grown into such a lad so quickly." Duir regarded Frodo with the fond, appraising look of an elder, and then produced a small gift box. "A welcome gift. I hope you'll like it." "Thank you, Uncle Duir," Frodo stammered, and took the box after Bilbo gave a small nod. Duir had sent him presents for his birthdays over the years, but circumstances had always prevented them from meeting. They were not strangers exactly, but this was their first proper encounter. Frodo opened the box to find a brooch shaped like a leaf from a white tree. Duir smiled. "It's enchanted. It will protect you when danger comes." Duir watched Frodo with a mix of affection and something more complex. It was hard to reconcile the shy hobbit before him with the central figure of a great tale, the ring-bearer who would, in time, take upon himself the task of destroying the One Ring, and with it, Sauron. Duir had not met that future Frodo in person, but he had kept a watchful eye from afar. According to the original course of things, Frodo's parents should have died when he was 12. Duir, who knew something of fate and foreknowledge, could not stand by and let that happen. Not only did he dislike the idea of Frodo becoming an orphan, but he had been friends with Drogo Baggins. When the exact day his friends would have perished slipped from memory, Duir had sent a protective magic, enough to spare them from drowning. He succeeded in keeping Drogo and Primula alive until Frodo was 15. Yet perhaps fate had already made its choice, or perhaps Mandos's counsel could not be denied. The Bagginses were again taken by the Brandywine. Primula Brandybuck had been the daughter of the Brandybuck house, and after her death, Frodo went to live with her kin. He grew up among his cousins in the Brandybuck household, and later the Took relations, Merry Brandybuck and Pippin Took, until Bilbo, who had no children of his own, adopted him when Frodo was 21 and brought him to Bag End. Bilbo had received an elixir of long life from Duir, and though he could have lived on indefinitely, he was not a man who wished to refuse the natural course of things forever. He liked comfort and quiet, and he feared that more distant relatives, eager for his property, might one day inherit Bag End if he did not choose an heir. So when the time felt right, he decided to stop taking the elixir and to accept the slow passage of age, though he also sought someone he could trust to inherit his home. Frodo, bereaved and plain of heart, appealed to him. After years of persuading the Brandybucks that Frodo would be well cared for, Bilbo gained their consent and took Frodo as his heir. For decades, Middle-earth had been relatively calm. Mordor had lain dormant, and Duir had spent much of his time at Hogwarts, deep in study and meditation. But in recent years, the wheels of fate began to turn again. Duir noticed Gandalf's more frequent visits to the Shire and to Bag End, and suspected the old wizard had made a decision. The One Ring, entrusted to Tom Bombadil in the Old Forest, had grown in latent power and had been reaching outward as if calling its master. Tom and his wife Goldberry were strangely unaffected by the ring's malice, but even they found its presence an annoyance, like a foul thing left inside one's home. No one would willingly keep putrid garbage at their side. If not for Tom's promise to guard the ring and Goldberry's soft, steady counsel, Tom might have long since disposed of it. As the ring revived, its bond with Sauron strengthened, and with that renewal, Sauron's power rose as well. When the Dark Lord at last perceived the ring's whereabouts, he would spare nothing to regain it. Tom Bombadil belonged to no faction and would not be drawn into the wars of Middle-earth. Duir and Gandalf could not compel him to take part either. They therefore planned long before Sauron's resurgence how to deal with the ring, to remove it or to destroy it outright. The problem was that even Galadriel and Gandalf dared not touch the ring. Only Hobbits' peculiar constitution gave them some resistance to its corruption, making one of them the most suitable possible bearer. Yet most Hobbits lacked the courage and restlessness needed for such a task. Those with adventurous blood, the Tooks and Brandybucks, had spirit, but were often impulsive and temperamental. Bilbo had been an exception. His mother came from the bold Took line, and his father from the comfort-loving Bagginses, and that combination gave him both the wanderlust to begin an adventure and the steadiness to endure it. For a time, Bilbo alone seemed fit to hold the ring. When he chose, against all expectation, to let the ring go, he proved he still had the will to reject it, but he was unwilling to risk touching it again. Neither Duir nor Gandalf would force Bilbo to bear so great a burden. When Frodo appeared, unassuming, steady, and already marked by loss, Gandalf saw a new hope. Frodo had a double heritage. His mother came from the adventurous Brandybuck line, his father from the Bagginses. Even as a child, he had shown traits that set him apart from most hobbits. The kindness, simplicity, and love of home that all hobbits shared, but also an unusual steadiness, courage, and resolve. When Bilbo adopted him, Gandalf took note, and over the years had kept a quiet eye on the young hobbit. None of Gandalf's movements had been hidden from Duir. Back at Bag End, conversation had barely begun when green flames burst from the fireplace once more. "I hope I'm not too late?" Gandalf asked with a broad smile as he stooped and stepped out of the chimney. "Gandalf, what brings you here?" Bilbo cried, surprised and delighted. Frodo, standing nearby, felt the same pleasure at seeing his old friend. "It's your 111th birthday. How could I miss it?" Gandalf winked at Bilbo, then turned to Frodo. "Well, Frodo, long time no see. You've grown, much taller than last I saw you. A handsome young man now, indeed." As if remembering something, Gandalf handed a small pouch to Frodo. "I can't compete with Duir's craftsmanship, so I made some fireworks myself as a birthday present. Let Frodo and the others set them off later to liven the party." Frodo opened the palm-sized bag and peered inside. It looked as if a whole cartload of rockets and crackers had been crammed into it. More than enough to keep Merry and Pippin shrieking with delight for hours. Merry and Pippin had been his playmates growing up, one the son of his maternal uncle, the other of his maternal aunt. They were lively, mischievous, inseparable, and had come along for Bilbo's celebration. The arrival of Duir, Gandalf, and their other guests put Bilbo in an excellent mood. With all hands present, he prepared to lead everyone down to the party field. Just as the group was talking and opening Bag End's round door, a young hobbit stood outside, about to knock. He was a little plump, with an honest, plain face and simple clothes. Seeing so many guests through the window, he looked surprised and flustered. "Sam, why are you here?" Frodo asked. Samwise Gamgee glanced at the roomful of unusual visitors and went white. "The feast in the party field is nearly ready, sir," he stammered. "Everyone's waiting for Mr. Bilbo, so they sent me to fetch him." Elses and Elros both studied the gardener with curiosity. Gandalf and Duir watched him with interest too. "Bilbo, who is this?" Duir asked, though he already had an idea. Bilbo introduced him casually. "This is Samwise Gamgee, gardener of Bag End. He tends the gardens. Sam, these are my honored guests, Gandalf, Duir, and his children Elses and Elros. Go on ahead to the party field and arrange their seats next to mine." Sam immediately brightened. "Right away, Mr. Baggins." He turned and hurried down the hill. "Hey, Sam, wait for me," Frodo called after him, then turned to Bilbo. "Uncle Bilbo, I'll go help as well." "Go on," Bilbo nodded. "Take Elses and Elros with you. They're a few years older than you, young people all. You'll have fun together." Frodo hesitated for a moment, looking at Elses and Elros. They were about his height, but had an air like children of 11 or 12. Although he already knew they were older than he, seeing them up close still surprised him. "Do you want to come?" he asked. Elses and Elros glanced to Duir. He smiled and gave them permission. "Go with Frodo if you wish. We will follow more slowly." They were quick to go. The twins had spent most of their childhood at Hogwarts, and the rest of their time between Rivendell and Lothlorien. Their furthest outing had been a trip to Hogsmeade. Though they were 38 by the reckoning of men, by elven standards they were still youngsters. They had graduated from Hogwarts, but in spirit they were curious and inexperienced, keen to learn all they could of the Hobbit way of life. As Frodo, Sam, Elses, and Elros trooped down the hill, only Bilbo, Duir, and Gandalf remained at Bag End, moving at a more deliberate pace. Bilbo watched the children go, a look of relief crossing his face before it was replaced by something more serious. He sighed, then spoke to his friends. "Duir, Gandalf, after today I intend to hand Bag End and all my affairs over to Frodo." Duir and Gandalf exchanged surprised looks. "Bilbo, I?" Gandalf asked, stopping in his tracks. Duir's expression showed equal puzzlement. Bilbo had thought this through a long time. He let his gaze roam over Hobbiton, silvered by moonlight, the features of his home filling him with bittersweet memories. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "I have lived here my entire life. If it weren't for the life elixir Duir once gave me, I would have been in my grave long ago, not still spry as I am. But this eternal youth has begun to draw attention. If I stay, it will only bring more trouble and make it harder for me to keep going with my travels and my writings." Hearing Bilbo's explanation, Duir and Gandalf understood. Bilbo's appearance, forever in his 50s, put him out of step with his neighbors. Friends and relatives had grown elderly or passed away, and ageless Bilbo among them invited suspicion, gossip, and perhaps worse. Leaving the Shire was the sensible choice. "If you do leave, where will you go?" Duir asked. Lord Elrond has invited me to Rivendell, Bilbo said with a smile. It's beautiful there, very fitting for a leisurely retirement. And of course, Duir, Hogwarts is lovely as well. If I wished to stay with you for a time, would you have me? You would be most welcome, Duir said earnestly. Hogwarts has always kept a room ready for you. Stay as long as you like. And if you would, you could help as an administrator, as Gandalf and the others sometimes do. Bilbo did not immediately accept Lord Duir's invitation to become an administrator at Hogwarts. While he still had the energy, he planned to travel through Rivendell, down the Anduin Valley, into Mirkwood, past Dale and Erebor, and perhaps even as far south as Fangorn, Isengard, Rohan, and Gondor. With the Floo network, long journeys were no longer the ordeal they once had been. Thousands of miles could be crossed in a single day. Still, those were ideas for later. For now, the most important thing was Bilbo's 111th birthday. Following the winding path, Bilbo, Duir, and Gandalf walked slowly down from Bag End and arrived at the Hobbiton gathering field in under half an hour. The field lay open beneath the great party tree, the place where the hobbits of Hobbiton held their feasts, celebrations, and storytelling. The tree was decorated year-round with colored lights and ribbons, and today a vast canvas tent had been pitched beneath its boughs. Almost everyone in Hobbiton had turned out. People had brought their own tables, benches, chairs, and crockery, joining them into long banquet rows covered with bright cloths and piled high with hobbit delicacies, and even goods from beyond the Shire. Banners hung at the tent's entrance in bright letters, celebrating Mr. Bilbo Baggins' 111th birthday. The banquet was a major event. The Green Dragon's cellars had been emptied for the day, and the bakers, biscuit makers, and grocers of Hobbiton had sold out to supply the feast. The neighbors whispered at such extravagance. To Bilbo, who owned a small mountain of gold, it was but a pleasant trifle. Country music played, and pairs of young hobbits took to the dance between the tables. Women bustled about seeing to last-minute needs, while the elders sat on benches, smoking their pipes and remarking on the splendor of it all and on how Bilbo had come by his wealth. The arrival of Elses and Elros Duir, traveling with Frodo and Sam, caused a new stir. Many hobbits had never seen elves, let alone a pair of young, graceful half-elven siblings, and for a moment the buzz of the feast quieted. Then the whispers began. Who were they, and how was it that Bilbo had such friends? Elses and Elros felt the curious glances and heard the soft questions. They were used to attention and bore it lightly. Frodo, quick to introduce his friends, led them toward Merry and Pippin. "Are you elves? You're just like the songs!" Pippin exclaimed, eyes wide with delight. He was so uncaged with curiosity that he seemed to vibrate. Elses smiled and shook his head. "I am Elses Duir, son of Lord Duir of Hogwarts. This is my sister Elros. We are half-elves, not full elves." Mary's eyes lit. "Is your father the Duir who downed a dragon? Does Hogwarts really have a dragon? What does a dragon look like? How big is it? Can it breathe fire?" "Enough questions at once, Mary," Frodo said, laughing, and the others leaned in. Elses and Elros were happy to answer. Elros smiled and told them plainly. "Hogwarts does have a dragon. His name is Smaug. He is my father's mount. He usually sleeps in the treasury, guarding the treasures, but when he moves, he breathes flames so hot they can melt the hardest steel. We haven't measured him precisely, but he is enormous, longer than many of the castle's turrets, bigger than most buildings at Hogwarts, certainly." "Wow!" the four hobbits cried together. The image of such a creature left them utterly astonished. "Isn't Hogwarts a school?" Pippin asked next, every question spilling out as it came. Elses and Elros told them everything they could. The subjects taught at Hogwarts, the castle's towers and moving staircases, thunderbirds like Zorando, tales of kraken seen by seafaring wizards, and other wondrous beasts. The hobbits listened with rapt faces, some of them longing for a taste of those wider marvels. Merry and Pippin, heirs to the adventurous Tooks and Brandybucks, decided at once that they would one day see Hogwarts for themselves. Hobbits from Took and Brandybuck lines already worked or traded in places like Bree and Hogsmeade. The idea of a visit no longer seemed so impossible. Even Frodo felt the pull. He carried in him the comfortable optimism of the Bagginses and the steady adventurousness of the Brandybucks, a tempering of curiosity and caution that made him, in many ways, another small Bilbo. As the two groups exchanged stories, their companionship deepened. Elses and Elros liked the simple, warm-hearted hobbits. Frodo and his friends admired the elves' beauty, grace, and gentleness. Merry and Pippin, always ebullient, soon began showing the pair the Shire's customs and pointing out favorite spots. Duir, Bilbo, and Gandalf reached the edge of the clearing and paused to watch the laughter and conversation. Gandalf chuckled. "It seems the young ones are getting along well." Bilbo nodded, his eyes bright. "Elses and Elros are splendid children. Who could dislike them?" Duir, pleased to hear his children praised, answered in kind. "Frodo and his friends are fine children as well. No wonder Elses and Elros took to them." With mutual smiles, the parents crossed the tent together toward the circle of young folk. "Dad!" Elses and Elros had seen them coming long before and now stood up, faces alight with joy. Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin rose as well. Before Bilbo, Gandalf, and Duir, even mischievous Merry and Pippin grew politely quiet. "Duir, Gandalf, let me introduce them," Bilbo said, indicating the tallest of the four hobbits, a young fellow with golden curls and blue eyes. "This is Meriadoc Brandybuck of Buckland. He is the only son of Saradoc Brandybuck, the master of Buckland and a cousin of Frodo." At being introduced to Duir and Gandalf, Merry straightened up, his gaze fixed on Duir, shining with excitement and admiration. "Lord Duir," he said, "you can call me Merry. It's an honor to meet you." A warmth crossed Duir's face as he saw Merry's eager expression. "Hello, Merry. I know both your grandfather and your father, and I once visited Buckland. They were very helpful to me. How are they doing?" "They're all well," Merry answered, growing more animated. "My grandfather and the others told me of your deeds, how you helped Buckland against the Old Forest. They call you the Tree Feller." The old epithet tugged at something in Duir. Years ago, when he had rashly provoked the horns of the Old Forest, he had driven them back and been given that name by the master of Buckland, Merry's grandfather. At the memory, Duir's mouth twitched. He reached for a dagger and handed it to the young hobbit. "For our first meeting," he said, "take this. I hope it may help keep you safe." The dagger Duir produced was one of the four taken from the tombs of the Barrow Downs, blades made in the days of Cardolan to stand against the Witch King of Angmar, weapons that could hold some power against dark things. Merry stared at it, a leaf-shaped blade, finely made, with red and gold serpent patterns along the guard and set in a black scabbard. The metal had not tarnished with time. It gave off a cold, keen glint. "Is this for me?" Merry breathed. Duir smiled and nodded. "It was once mine. The smiths of the Old Kingdom made it. I have no further use for it. Take it, and use it well." Merry drew the dagger with reverent care and hugged it to himself. "Thank you, Lord Duir. I will treasure it." Bilbo and Gandalf exchanged surprised looks. Gandalf, who knew more of the blade's properties, could not help wondering at Duir's generosity. Had he foreseen something? Frodo, Sam, and Pippin watched Merry's prize with open envy. The scabbard was set with small stones, and the dagger's flawless steel and sharp edge betrayed a quality beyond ordinary workmanship. Bilbo went on to the next introduction, motioning to the smallest hobbit, a boy with brown hair and dark eyes. "This is Peregrine Took of Tuckborough. He is the son of Paladin Sixth Took, the Thane of the Shire, and a cousin to Frodo and Merry." At his name, Pippin straightened, nervous but thrilled. "Hello, Lord Duir. Call me Pippin. My father told me of you, that you once visited Tuckborough and showed him wondrous things." Duir laughed softly. "I remember when your father was but a little fellow in Tuckborough. I can hardly believe he has sons of his own now. Time slips by. How are your grandfather and your father?" Pippin's face clouded. "My grandfather died in 2982, before I was born. Father is well. He stays in Tuckborough." Duir's expression changed at the mention of Paladin. He had once been given a warm welcome by the Took household and even loaned a carriage for his travels, a carriage that had accompanied him as far as Rivendell during the quest of Erebor. Now those days felt distant. The carriage and its pony were gone, and old friends were dust. The thought of time's passage brought a sudden melancholy. It explained, he thought, why the elves so often withdrew from the affairs of other folk to avoid repeated grief at the loss of those they loved. He was comforted, too, by his private truths. His wife Arwen was an elf. Their children bore her blood and the long life that came with it. He himself possessed means. an elixir of life and a lineage touched by elvish grace that would keep his family united if they so chose. Such thoughts steadied him. He smiled at Pippin, who was trying to appear unassuming while clearly hoping to impress, and drew another dagger from his belt. "Pippin," Duir said, "here, for you. Make good use of it." Pippin received it like a treasure, hugging it close and thanking Duir over and over, his simple delight making everyone chuckle. Duir then looked at Sam. The gardener's face held envy, but restrained by careful manners. He did not expect such gifts. Sam had no noble pedigree like Merry or Pippin. He was a plain hobbit, Frodo's gardener and friend, content with small hopes, a good marriage, and a settled life. Yet Duir had seen something that set Sam apart, his steadfast loyalty. Sam's devotion to Frodo, his willingness to stand by him through all dangers, his courage when it mattered most, left a deep impression. Duir had watched, in his mind, how Sam never turned away, how he would risk all rather than abandon his friend. Moved by that constancy, Duir handed Sam a dagger as well. He had already offered Frodo a small welcome gift, but he drew the last of the barrow blades and gave that to Frodo too. In that way, the 4 daggers taken from the Barrow Downs were returned to hands they were meant for: Meriadoc, Peregrine, Samwise, and Frodo, each now armed with a blade of old forged in a time when men stood against shadow. The birthday banquet was a lively whirl of song, pipeweed, and laughter, but a hush of curiosity ran under the noise whenever Dewey and Gandalf moved through the room. Dewey in particular drew stares. People craned their necks to steal glances, convinced their looks were discreet. The 2 tall figures stood like cranes among chickens in the midst of hobbits, as if they had come to a land of miniatures. Hogwarts lay near the Shire, and the Shire traded with Bree and Hogsmeade, so even hobbits who had never traveled had heard of the Lord of Hogwarts. 60 years had passed since Dewey first visited the Shire. Many who remembered him then were gone now. More than that, whispers said Bilbo's long youthfulness owed something to this wizard lord. All of that made Dewey a focal point of curiosity. At the height of the feast, Bilbo rose. The music stuttered to a stop, and 1,000 curious faces turned toward him. He looked around at his neighbors, drew a breath, and spoke loudly. "Dear friends, I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Today is my 111th birthday, and also my nephew Frodo's 33rd. In this joyful time, I regret to announce it's time for everything to end. I'm leaving. I'm leaving the Shire, and I'm leaving now. As for my property in Bag End, my nephew Frodo will inherit them. I ask you all to bear witness. Goodbye." Then Bilbo slipped on a gold ring, and to the astonishment of everyone, vanished. A dozen shocks rippled through the hall, gasping, murmurs, wide eyes at such a sudden and brazen departure. Only Dewey and Gandalf smiled with calm, watching the empty space where Bilbo had been. They had no trouble following him. Bilbo's invisibility did not escape their notice. At the bustling conclusion of the feast, Dewey rose with Elses and Elros, and Gandalf rose too. Together they left. They did not don invisibility, but somehow they went unseen, unnoticed by the throng. It was only after they were well away that Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin remembered and hastily looked for them, puzzled when they could not say when the 4 had slipped away. On the narrow path to Bag End, just before an old oak, Dewey and Gandalf paused. They smiled up at the tree. Gandalf called softly, "Bilbo, are you waiting for us here?" With a small, helpless expression, Bilbo removed the ring and reappeared. "You two always see through me," he said. Dewey chuckled. "I forged this ring," he said, "so it could not hide from me. And as for Gandalf, there is hardly an invisibility that can hide from his eyes." The gold ring was one of Dewey's gifts to Bilbo, an alchemical piece, the result of both alchemy and ringcraft. When worn, it granted invisibility and heightened a hobbit's native qualities. Stealth and subtlety were amplified. To ordinary folk, the wearer would be completely unseen. Only eyes such as Sauron's, Galadriel's, or Gandalf's could pierce its concealment. Dewey had made it as a safeguard for Bilbo after the loss of the One Ring, to help him vanish and preserve himself when needed. Gandalf bowed his head slightly and smiled in modesty. "Oh, Dewey, you flatter me. Your ringcraft is praised even by Lady Galadriel. As for my seeing Bilbo, it was your reminder that gave me extra watchfulness. Otherwise, I might not have noticed so easily." Dewey and Gandalf soon changed the subject back to Bilbo's sudden resolve. "Bilbo, why are you in such a hurry? Frodo hardly seems prepared. Will you not stay a while longer?" Dewey asked. Bilbo shook his head. "I have been here for nearly a lifetime. Once I decide to go, I cannot dither. If I stayed a little longer, I might lose the courage to leave. And Frodo is grown. Leaving Bag End to him relieves me greatly." Seeing Bilbo's mind made up, Dewey and Gandalf no longer pressed him. "In that case," Dewey said, "you should come with us to Hogwarts tonight. You can rest there, and when you tire of it, you may still go on to Rivendell. The school is preparing an inter-house tournament this year. It will be lively, something you should not miss." At the mention of Hogwarts, Bilbo's face lit up and his hesitation vanished. "Then I shall trouble you for the next few days." "What trouble? We are friends. We shall be glad you are coming." They returned to Bag End to pack. Bilbo declined Dewey's help and set about gathering the few possessions he wished to take. The hole in the hill felt the strange hush of imminent parting. The door opened, and Frodo came in, breathless. He stood watching Bilbo with an expression full of reluctance. "Uncle Bilbo, are you really leaving?" he asked. Bilbo paused and patted Frodo's shoulder gently. "Frodo, you're grown. I am content to leave this home to you. There is one more thing I must give you. Keep it secret, lest it draw unwanted folk." He handed Frodo a mithril vest and a small leathern space pouch. Frodo's mouth fell open when Bilbo told him the mithril would buy the whole of the Shire, and his eyes widened at the sight of golden coins and jewels that seemed to spill an impossible heap from the space pouch. He had long known his uncle was wealthy, but not like this. Probably all the hobbits' combined fortunes could not equal Bilbo's. Bilbo was proud in the soft way he always was. "This was my 1/14th share of the dragon's hoard after our journey to the Lonely Mountain, when I, Dewey, Gandalf, and the dwarves were there. After all these years, I have spent very little." Frodo protested. "Uncle, you'll need money for the road. Take it with you." Bilbo smiled and shook his head. "I have enough. More would be a burden. The rest is yours to do with as you like. You could not spend it all in many lifetimes." They worked together in companionable silence, uncle and nephew packing, folding, tying. Dewey, Gandalf, Elses, and Elros sat quietly to one side, keeping their counsel and not intruding on the private final hours before departure. Gandalf's eyes never left Frodo. He watched every flicker of expression as Bilbo pressed the mithril coat and the strange spatial pouch brimming with gold into his nephew's hands. Frodo showed no greed, only a quiet sorrow at Bilbo's leaving, and the look of approval that crossed Gandalf's face was quick and almost conspiratorial. Dewey noticed it, considered it inwardly, and gave nothing away. Then Gandalf's voice filled Dewey's mind. Telepathy, soft, direct. "Duir, what do you think of making Frodo the ring-bearer?" Dewey turned to meet him and realized, with no small surprise, that Gandalf was speaking to him silently. "How so?" he answered. Gandalf's thoughts were grave. "I have seen the wheels of fate begin to turn again. A new war is coming, one worse than before. Sauron's power has swelled, perhaps almost as mighty as in his old days. The One Ring is a perpetual danger. The stronger Sauron grows, the tighter their bond, and they will try to be reunited. Even Tom Bombadil cannot break that bond." He paused. Tom is outside the quarrels of the world. His guardianship of the ring these past years has been a blessing, but we cannot burden him further, nor can we drag Goldberry and him into a war. We need another ring-bearer, someone less susceptible to the ring's will, to take the ring from the old forest and destroy it once and for all. Dewey frowned. "How do you mean?" he asked. Gandalf turned his attention to Frodo and let a small smile touch his voice. "I mean to form another company to escort the ring to Mount Doom. There, in the fire where Sauron forged it, the ring can be unmade." Dewey's doubts were immediate. But Mount Doom lies in the heart of Mordor, under Sauron's very gaze. Sauron's power has returned. His hold on Mordor is firm. If the ring comes near, won't Sauron sense it at once? We might be walking the ring straight back into his hands. Gandalf nodded. "That is the danger." In the old course of things, Frodo and his companions slipped to Mount Doom by a mixture of stealth and luck. Gollum's treachery and Sauron's temporary lack of form helped them. Now Sauron is no longer a shadow. He may have Morgoth's aid. His strength and his tie to the ring are deep. The moment the ring draws near, Sauron will know, and he will move to reclaim it. If he regains it, all will be lost. So we must not try to push the ring across Mordor while he stays at home. We will draw him out. Dewey's interest sharpened. How would you do that? Gandalf's reply was steady and ruthless with cunning. Sauron's ambition will not let him remain shut away. He will not be content while the One Ring survives and the free peoples grow bolder. If he hears that we plan to send the ring across the sea to the Blessed Realm to be purified, if he believes it will be taken beyond his reach, he will come forth himself to stop it. We will make that news public. We will force him to act. While Sauron marches outward, Lady Galadriel, Lord Elrond, Círdan, the White Council and I will engage him openly. We will hold him fast on the main field. Then, in the confusion, a small party will slip into Mordor and cast the ring into Mount Doom. Sauron poured much of his own being into the ring. They are one. Destroy the ring, and Sauron will be ended utterly. Dewey could see the plan's logic and felt a warm thrill of hope. If Sauron can be drawn away, even far from Mordor, the Ring-Bearer's party could find a chance no longer available if Sauron remained alert at home. So you would choose Frodo as the Ring-Bearer? Gandalf glanced toward Bilbo and Frodo. I would sooner pick Bilbo, he said softly. He knows wandering and hardship, and his will is strange and steadfast. He would make a fine bearer. But Bilbo is old now. The years have worn his spirit, even if his face shows little of it. He cannot carry such a burden again. Frodo is, in many ways, Bilbo younger. Both's mothers came from families with wanderlust in their blood, both their fathers belong to steady Baggins stock, and both share a birthday. It seems almost as if something in the dark thought ahead and set them to await this day. Dewey thought, you were not wrong. The uncle and the nephew had indeed been placed at the center of later events for decades. Still, how to persuade Frodo? Dewey persisted. The journey to Mount Doom is no small thing. One misstep and death. The ring will gnaw at him every day. The slow erosion is a torment few could survive. Will Frodo agree to it? Gandalf's sigh was a soft rasp. I would not ask it lightly, he replied, but there are few who could bear the ring's assault and remain themselves. Hobbits are peculiarly resistant to the ring. Because of their simple, peaceful nature, they are less tempted than proud men or cunning elves. Yet most hobbits will not leave home. Only those touched by both the hobbit's steadiness and a stir of real wanderlust, Bilbo and Frodo, can be tempted by adventure enough to take on such a task. Knowing that, Gandalf took upon himself the hard work of forming the escort and persuading Frodo, as he had once persuaded Bilbo years ago. Dewey did not interfere in the shaping of the fellowship. Gandalf would carry that responsibility alone. When Bilbo had finished packing and said his farewells, Dewey accompanied him out of Bag End. With him went Elses and Elros, and together they slipped away by way of the fireplace. Gandalf remained behind a while longer in the cozy study, turning plans over in his mind and preparing, as he had prepared long ago, to win one more hobbit to a grave but necessary road. After decades of growth, Hogwarts had become a magic academy famed across Middle-earth. Its intake had stabilized at about 100 new students a year, so the school sheltered 600 or 700 pupils at any given time. With professors, teaching assistants, and staff, the population inside the castle walls topped 700. Most recruits came from the surrounding lands. A few Dunedain appeared each year, and an elven child only every few years. The Dunedain numbered only a few thousand, and their long lifespans meant many, like Aragorn, remained unmarried well into what for ordinary folk would be old age. Elves, with their slow birth rate and long maturation, were even rarer. An elven student arriving at Hogwarts was treated as a marvel, adored by both classmates and professors. During the sorting ceremony, an elven newcomer drew the whole school's attention, and every house hoped the elf would be placed with them. Elves' superior reflexes and keen senses also made them exceptional Quidditch players. The house that won an elf student often erupted in cheers, while rival houses fell quiet with disappointed faces. The wider Hogwarts domain had developed steadily over the years. Roughly 30,000 wizards lived throughout the region, about a third of the local population, forming villages and small towns that clustered like satellites around Hogwarts, with Hogsmeade and Bree as principal hubs across Eriador. Under Duir's leadership, the territory he governed had come to cover most of Eriador. If he had chosen to take a crown, the lands would have been indistinguishable from a kingdom. Other powers already spoke of the Wizard Kingdom, or simply Hogwarts. Hogwarts Castle itself functioned as the royal city, and Duir was, in effect, an uncrowned king. Hogwarts' reach included the castle, Hogsmeade, Bree, Isengard, and even the Gap of Rohan Plains where Dunlendings lived. Though the total population of the domain was only around 100,000, far smaller than Gondor or Rohan, no one underestimated its power. Duir's personal sorceries were vast. He commanded terrible creatures like dragons and thunderbirds, and the 30,000 wizards were a force to be reckoned with. When war once flared in the Far East, Hogwarts had sent only 100 wizards, its Auror elite, and routed Mordor armies numbering in the tens of thousands. Other realms could not imagine how devastating it would be if the entire 30,000 were mobilized. The memory of that small but decisive force kept them respectful, if not fearful. Mordor, in particular, had remained unusually quiet in recent years. It was not only Hogwarts' outward strength that deterred aggression, but the school's control over strategic strongholds. Isengard, for example, bordered Rohan and Gondor. In the misty mountains nearby lay the largest dragon breeding grounds, tended by thousands of dragon tamers with formidable magic. Thousands more Dunlending wizards lived around Isengard and on the Gap of Rohan Plains. In wartime, they could be mustered as a swift and devastating fighting force. Among wizards, Duir was spoken of as the supreme wizard. If the title of Witch King had not already been claimed elsewhere, Duir would have been acknowledged as the king of wizards without dispute. Back within the castle, Bilbo had settled into life at Hogwarts after leaving the Shire. What he had meant to be a temporary stay had become permanent. He loved the constant bustle, the students laughing, the brooms everywhere, and accepted Duir's invitation to remain as the school's administrator. That semester, the school was preparing to hold the Triwizard Tournament. Students who had been mourning the loss of Quidditch found the new spectacle an easy consolation. The Triwizard Tournament, sometimes called the Four-House Tournament, was designed to involve the whole school. To make it fair, Duir and the professors set rules. Each house would hold internal selection contests, wizard duels, to choose its one strongest representative for the final competition. As the internal selections began, the castle hummed with excitement again. The format gave everyone a chance to participate, but younger students were bound to be eliminated in the early rounds. They bore their defeats cheerfully, turning to shout encouragement for their older classmates and hoping their house would carry the day. It was in the middle of that charged atmosphere that Gandalf returned from the Shire, stepping out of a fireplace with Frodo and 3 other hobbits at his heels. "Gandalf, what is this?" Duir asked, staring at the 4 hobbits materializing in the hearth. Gandalf answered plainly, "Duir, Frodo has agreed." Duir's expression sharpened. He looked at Frodo, surprised. He had not expected Gandalf to be so persuasive. Becoming the ring-bearer was no easy honor. It was a thankless, near-fatal task. Frodo could still refuse and live out a comfortable life in the Shire on his inheritance. "Frodo," Duir said, his voice grave, "are you truly resolved? You must know how dangerous this will be. You may die on the road. The ring will try to corrupt you. It will bring you pain and torment. Even if you succeed, the wounds you carry will not be easily healed. Do you still accept this?" Frodo felt the weight of Duir's gaze as if his thoughts were laid bare. He instinctively wanted to look away, but forced himself to meet the wizard's eyes. Then, with a look of quiet determination, he nodded. "I am certain," he said. "Just as Gandalf said," Frodo declared, voice steady. "If Sauron cannot be completely destroyed, then when he grows in strength and darkness covers all of Middle-earth, the Shire will no longer be safe. I will not let my home, my family, and my friends be ruined by war. Besides, my uncle found the One Ring, and as his heir, I have a duty to finish what he started, to destroy the ring and restore peace to the world." Dewey's eyes brightened with admiration, and he gave a small, that secret nod. The young hobbit lived up to being a true protagonist. His resolve was extraordinary. He turned from Frodo to Gandalf and smiled. "He's an admirable young man." Gandalf's face lit up. "My judgment has always been impeccable." Dewey hesitated. "But what about the 3 others?" In the old story, Sam overheard the truth about the ring and was forced to leave the Shire with Frodo. Pippin and Merry met them by chance and joined the journey. Why, Dewey wondered, were Sam, Merry, Isaive, and Pippin now following Frodo and Gandalf to Hogwarts? Gandalf shrugged with an apologetic smile. Sam simply would not be left behind. He wanted to follow Frodo. As for Merry and Pippin, I caught them trying to use the fireplace without permission, and they begged me to come along. I have a feeling, call it a premonition, that the Fellowship will need them. They will play a part, and Frodo will need companions. True friendship can become the strongest shield against the ring's corruption. Dewey nodded, not surprised. If Gandalf had a plan, there was no point questioning it. He welcomed Frodo and the three hobbits to Hogwarts and arranged for their stay. The destruction of the One Ring required careful preparation and coordination with Rivendell, Lothlorien, and others. There was no rush to move the ring yet. For now, Gandalf and Dewey agreed they should be allowed a few calm, comfortable days before the long road ahead. After all, their carefree days would soon end. Their next steps would carry the fate of Middle-earth. At Hogwarts, they were greeted by the castle's mistress, Arwen. Even the most mischievous Merry and Pippin found themselves shy and restrained in the presence of the gentle, radiant Lady Undomiel. Arwen liked them at once. She found pleasant rooms for them and entrusted Elses and Elros to show them around the castle. Seeing the familiar faces of their guides, Frodo and the others finally relaxed. Led by Elses and Elros, they explored the castle, met professors and students, and even ran into Bill, the caretaker. Every wonder of the school astonished them, moving portraits and shifting staircases, floating candles and a transparent ceiling over the great hall, suits of armor that walked and talked, and the tall, shining 2 trees of gold and silver. Gardens bloomed with unceasing flowers, students zipped past on broomsticks, cheering. Everything dazzled them, and none of the 4 wanted to miss a single magical sight. That evening, they joined the students for the banquet in the Great Hall and watched the Triwizard selection trials. 2 senior students faced off on the platform, wands poised. One shouted, "Avis!" and a flock of birds burst from his wand, meant to blind and disrupt his opponent. The other, a master of transfiguration, transformed the flock into a broad, solid shield. With a flick, the shield reshaped into a roaring lion that leapt at the first student. The attacker froze the lion, made it vanish, and then unleashed a coiling serpent of fire that surged toward his rival. The Transfigurer responded by summoning a spring of water and changing it into a huge octopus, its tentacles wrapped around the fiery python. Steam rose and sizzled as water met flame, the mist shrouding the platform and the crowd craning their necks to see. When a gust of wind cleared the spray, the 2 conjurations lay ruined. The Transfigurer stood with his wand trained on his opponent, who was bound by a chain of water and could not break free. It turned out the winner had quietly moved a puddle under his rival's feet and used Transfiguration to bind him while the spectacle distracted everyone. The judge called the victory, and the spectators erupted in cheers, applauding both students for a brilliant duel. Frodo, Sam, and Pippin spent 2 blissful weeks at Hogwarts, meeting many students and professors. Merry and Pippin even made fast friends with Peeves. Those carefree days were a rare respite. Then a letter arrived from Rivendell. Gandalf read it and looked up at Dewey. "Lord Elrond is convening a council," he said. "He's asking all the races to send representatives to discuss the One Ring and to form the Fellowship." Dewey frowned as he took the letter. If Frodo is already the ring-bearer, why call a meeting of everyone? Aren't you afraid the news will spread and Sauron will sense our plans? Gandalf shook his head. The ring cannot be destroyed by any of us alone. We must unite the forces of Middle-earth. Only by bringing together men, elves, dwarves, and others, by showing them the danger, can we form the alliance necessary to stand against Sauron. He tapped the letter thoughtfully. If every faction sees that the ring is in our hands, they will understand that destroying it is the only way to defeat Sauron and bring true peace. Only then will they set aside grievances and give their full aid. He gave Dewey a conspiratorial look and smiled. And we wanted to draw Sauron out anyway. This council is the perfect way to spread word of the ring and to catch his attention. We can even plant false rumors, say the ring will be sent to the Blessed Realm in the west. Sauron cannot ignore such news. And once he moves to investigate, Gandalf finished, Frodo can slip into Mordor and destroy the ring.